Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Lindsay Whitley. I serve as the Associate Superintendent for Communications and Community Engagement with Cumberland County Schools. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us today as we announce the district's 21-22 performance data results. So today, joining us, we have several district leaders as well as a school principal. First, we have Cumberland County School Superintendent, Dr. Marvin Connolly Jr. We also have our Executive Director of Data and Accountability, Kim Nash. Next, we have Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Stacy Wilson Norman. We have Associate Superintendent of School Support, Dr. Jane Fields. And we also have one of our principals, Principal John McMillan from Lewis Chapel Middle School. So we're thankful that they are here with us today, and they're going to discuss the district's 21-22 performance data results, including test scores, our graduation rates, and low-performing schools. I wanted to say, following the overview of the data, we will invite all members of the press to ask any questions following that overview. Please keep in mind that we received the data in its entirety today, and we're still sorting through it. So they will try to answer as many questions as they can. However, if there's something we don't have today, we'll just kindly let you know that we'll look into it and try to get it to you as soon as possible, and my office will work to get that to you. So to kick us off today, we're going to call on our superintendent to come on to the podium, and he will bring us brief remarks. Dr. Connolly.
Good afternoon. It's a great day in Cumberland County Schools. 3 years ago, we developed our strategic plan, 2024, as a commitment to our young people here in Cumberland County. Over the past 2 years, we navigated a global pandemic with COVID disruption and staffing shortages, all while focusing on the academic needs of our students and responding to unfinished learning. Despite unimaginable circumstances, together, we have risen to the occasion to overcome incredible challenges. We all know that test results are only one of the many ways that we measure the progress we are making in our district. However, I am pleased to announce that the 2021-2022 accountability data affirms the incredible work that is taking place in our classrooms and in our schools. While we certainly have much more work to do, it is definitely in order for us to celebrate the progress that we have made as a district while in recovery from the pandemic. As a district, we recognize that this is a process from pre-pandemic to pandemic, and now we're in recovery. However, together, not only will we rise, but together we are rising. At this time, I would like to introduce our Executive Director of Data and Accountability, Kim Nash.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to take a moment before we look at the data for Cumberland County Schools just to briefly review the North Carolina accountability model. So as required by the North Carolina General Statute 115C.83.15 and the North Carolina Every Student Succeeds Act, school performance grades are based on two overall components: student growth and achievement. Student growth is measured using EVOS, which is a value-added growth model that measured expected progress against actual progress. And achievement indicators for elementary and middle schools differ slightly from those at the high school level. Elementary and middle use proficiency from reading, math, science, as well as EL progress. And as you can see in the chart, high school adds back in additional factors such as graduation rate, math rigor, and some ACT and ACT work keys measures. And participation does count in the accountability model when the goals are not met, and they also align with the school's long-term goals. So everything that counts in a school performance grade is also part of the school's long-term goal. So to begin with, we want to take a look at district proficiency composites. So the proficiency composites are measured by the percent of students who reach acceptable achievement levels on their assessments. And the composite levels that you'll see represent all end-of-grade assessments and end-of-course state mandated results. So the first comparison is for our entire district, and this is our overall performance composite. As you can see, the orange bar in the chart represents the 2018-19 scores. Those are what we're considering pre-pandemic. In 2019-2020, there were no assessments given, so there is no data to report. The yellow represents the assessment scores in the midst of the pandemic. And the blue represents where our district is currently after year one of our recovery efforts. So as you can see, that district proficiency increased from 36.8 to 47.3 over the course of this last year. 98.9% of schools in our district increased their composite proficiency scores on these state mandated assessments. Every end of course and end of grade area produced increases. So on average, those increases are more than 10 percentage points. Focusing in on our elementary schools, the graphs that you see represent the same. The orange are pre-pandemic, yellow during the midst of the pandemic, and blue after year one of recovery. On the top left are graphs including the reading information, and on the bottom right is the math information. So overall, for reading, grades 3 through 5, proficiency increased from 36.6 percentage points to 43.1. Math increased from 28.9 to 45.1. And science is our other measure for our elementary schools. Also, the same pattern exists with an increase of our proficiency. So again, highlights from our elementary school: increases occurred at all grade levels and in all subject areas. Our overall highlights, narrowing down to specific courses: third grade math increased 21.1 percentage points, and fourth grade reading increased 12.8 percentage points. So a focus on our middle school proficiency. Again, reading will be found at the top left and math on the bottom right. Our overall reading proficiency for middle schools increased from 42.6 to 47.1, while math increased 28.9 to 36.8. The pattern continued for our 8th grade science. 8th grade science increased from 63.6 to 71.7. Our high school proficiency levels followed again the same pattern. This graph represents all 4 of our high school end of course assessment results: biology, English 2, math 1, and math 3. Again, increases occurred in each of the 4 areas, with our strongest increases in the areas of math 1 and math 3. Our high school achievement also includes ACT and ACT work keys indicators. As you can see on the graph, those scores declined slightly. The reason for the decline is that during the 2021-2022 school year, the UNC admissions system increased their benchmark for ACT from 17 to 19. That also impacted our measures for accountability. They increased from 17 to 19. So the orange and the yellow, the pre-pandemic and during the pandemic, reflects that benchmark level being at a 17, and the blue levels reflect that increase where the benchmark level rose to 19. High school graduation rates are also an indicator for our high schools. And for the 21-22 school year, there was a slight decrease in those graduation rates from 84.2% to 82.8%. So the school composite highlights in terms of proficiency, we'd like to highlight at 3 schools at each of those levels. You can see that our elementary, the greatest composite gains occurred at Warrenwood, Ponderosa, and Mary MacArthur Elementary. For our middle schools, the highest composite gains were from Reed Ross Classical, Lewis Chapel Middle, and Luther Nick Gerald's Middle. And our high school composite gains, the greatest gains were from Cape Fear High School, Pine Forest High School, and Douglas Byrd High School. The second component of our accountability measure, is from academic growth. And as I said, academic growth is measured by EVOS, so that there is a statewide model for measuring growth, which determines the impact of our educational programs on student learning. So as a summary for our district, 89% of schools in Cumberland County met or exceeded growth for the 2021-2022 school year. Cumberland Polytechnic and Jack Britt High School received the maximum converted growth score of 100 points. So as you can see from the chart, there were 9 schools that did not meet growth, 21 met, and 55 exceeded their growth measures for the 21-22 school year. The following chart shows our leaders in the growth category. As we've mentioned, Jack Britt High School and Cumberland Polytechnic High School converted to the 100 points. And you can see some of our other leaders there in the district for their growth projection and growth models. The 2 components, achievement and growth, make up our school performance grades. So 80% of that grade is based on the first measures that we discussed, which are proficiencies, and 20% is based on that last model, which is growth. So had our schools received a school performance grade from the state in 2020-2021, those were not pushed out by the state, but as a district, we calculated them to see where our measures were. Had they been calculated based on the model, you can see the chart on the left would be our pandemic levels. In the midst of the pandemic, using that model, we would have had 45 schools that would have had a grade of F. After our first year of recovery and the model being implemented for this school year, based on our results, we currently have what you see in the chart on the right. We have 4 A schools, 14 schools that are B, 31 schools that are C, 33 D, and 4 F. So quite an improvement from the midst of the pandemic. So the low-performing school update, previously our low-performing schools, there were 23 schools on that list for our district. At this time, we are removing 15 from that list based on the state designation. We have added 8 back in, so our low-performing list of schools for Cumberland County is a total of 16. So what you see on the screen and what you have access to list all of our schools who are low-performing. So while the data does have some opportunities, and it does indicate there are some opportunities for improvement for our district, we'll have an increased focus on our high school achievement measures, focusing on ACT, graduation, and continuing to increase our math scores for Math 1 and Math 3. We will continue to deepen our work in early literacy for our students. We'll continue to focus on increasing proficiency for all students and all student subgroups, and continue our focus on the improvement of instruction and support for our schools who are Tier 1 and Tier 2 schools. So we do have some opportunities for our district to continue to improve, but today we would also like to celebrate the accomplishments of our schools, our teachers, our students, and community. Our celebrations include proficiency gains in every grade and subject area tested in our elementary and middle schools, and in every end of course area in our high schools. A reduction in the number of recurring low-performing schools, and a reduction in the number of low-performing schools for our district. And 89.4% of our schools meeting or exceeding growth measures. So as we continue our recovery efforts with the data in place, we will continue to rise. Yes, sir. So the model that we use for growth is EVOS, and they take all of a student's testing history for the course of their academic career, and they generate a predicted assessment measure. And then growth is based on how the students actually perform based upon how they were predicted or projected to perform based on their assessment history. Yes, sir. Other questions?
I'd like to get into the numbers if you could, or is that something we need to wait for later?
Okay, which?
Looking at the pre-pandemic stuff, we had the district performance composite for grades 3 through 12. You're at 54.7, I'm assuming that's percentage, right?
Yes, it is.
Why are we not at 70?
When-
The question is, we're at 47, that's half the students are failing. So you talk about growth, but yet you're failing to teach the kids at that grade level.
I can take that. I think that when it comes to performance, we must remember the impact of the pandemic was huge on student learning. And we're in recovery mode. So while we're making significant growth in student learning outcomes, the impact of the pandemic may take us years to recover from in student learning. So the impact is real. And while we want the performance to be higher, we're realists, and we realize that it was a significant impact. But I think more importantly, the amount of growth that we have seen is the weightier matter.
Can we go to a principal?
Sure.
Talk to me about what you're, because you had success in growth, and it looks like your numbers were a little higher as far as percentages. Talk to me about what you're doing different than the 15 schools that are on that list that made it deep.
Well, I'm not going to say we're doing anything different because as a district, we focus heavily on high-yield instructional strategies. We also work very hard to make sure we have all hands on deck, and that's from the top down. So we're just very strategic about what we are instructing, laser-like focus, making sure that we try to meet the individual needs of all students. And that's with a focus on data-driven instruction. Data has to be at the forefront, so we develop, we maintain professional learning communities, and we also ensure that our teachers are supported, and that is very important to us. As you know, there's a struggle with hiring teachers, recruiting teachers, and so when we get these teachers in, we have to make sure that our teachers are supported, coached, instructed, so that we can make sure that we get the outcome that we have at Lewis Chapel, which is a growth index of an 8.9. And so we contribute this to all hands on deck, ensuring that there's laser-like focus on each student to ensure that all of our students are successful.
The question is, I'm sorry for doing this, I'm trying to find it, that the Washington Post today had a story where they cited a national study that said that elementary school scores are so low, the lowest in decades. How do you account for the fact that Cumberland County is doing great compared to the national average? What would you say is the reason? Anybody?
I would say it is the supports that have been put in place, that our superintendent and board have worked really hard to ensure that we have additional tutors in school at the elementary level. When we think about the pandemic and kindergarten students who started school virtually, and so providing those additional supports have been a strategy in place. Looking at how we support our teachers and provide them with additional support at the early learning levels, I would attribute to some of the successes.
Can you give us an example of some of that support?
Sure. When we think about our North Carolina Education Corps tutoring support, so we've provided additional 5 tutors at many of our elementary sites. When we look at how we've redesigned our curriculum to provide more structured and tailored support to our teachers, are just some of the strategies that have been put in place to ensure that our youngest students are receiving what they need.
If I can add to that, also the social and emotional well-being of students is very important to our county, and we have worked strategically at addressing this issue with adding more counselors and social workers. Of course, with the pandemic, we have a lot of our students that have high needs in this area. And so just making sure that those students are supported, building a environment, a culture where students feel safe, their needs are being met and addressed so that we can prep them for the learning.
Ms. McNeil, you may have already answered, but my mic wasn't there. I wanted to get this, make sure we get good audio from you. You are a principal at one of the at one of the schools that was one of the low performing schools.
That's correct.
And you've turned it around. Were you principal there when it was low performing?
I was not, my first year was last year. So I came in last year and we worked to come up with a shared vision, a plan. Again, as I stated earlier, just making sure that all hands were on deck to improve the school, as that is our model from top down, and just ensuring that we have those strategic learning practices in place. We focus heavily in our district on data, looking at that data, analyzing that data, breaking it down for each student. What does it mean for this student? What does it mean for that student? And then most importantly, coming up with a strategic plan of how we're going to meet those students' needs. And so I feel like that helped with the success of Lewis Chapel and giving us the growth index of an 8.9.
As I recall, my daughter went there some time ago. Is that a low-income performing or community?
That's correct.
That you service?
That's correct.
So you can sing some success and give some encouragement to other schools that come from similar backgrounds, that all's not lost based on the economics. Talk about that a little bit.
That is correct, and I stick to just having those high expectations. Because of a kid's social economical status does not mean that he or she cannot perform. So expectations are at the forefront for me, just having the high expectations of students, staff, and then getting that support as much as we can from parents, creating those partnerships, making sure that we have those parents that are involved as much as possible, and just building a sense of community. And again, all hands on deck, just making sure all stakeholders are included in the child's learning progress.
Where were you and where are you now, number-wise, in the turnaround?
I'm number 3 in the district as far as growth.
But in terms of when you were a low-performing school, what was the percentage, and then where are you now? Yeah, I mean, I can look it up. I just want to hear it come out of your mouth.
Yes. So we had so we were 23.4% in our proficiency, and we went to a 38% proficiency jump, which is great actually.
When you saw those numbers, what did you do?
Well, when I saw those numbers, I thought about my staff and my students. I met with my students this week to just let them know. I couldn't because the data hadn't came out yet, but just appreciate the students and let them know how much we appreciated them, that they did a good job last year without sharing too much data, and just making sure that the students understand that we're building a culture, we're building a school to where they have that ownership and taking pride in their school. And regardless of what has been said about the school, the social economical status, they still can learn and they still can achieve.
Hey, I have 2 questions. Great numbers, but let me boil it down. When I see one school struggling and another school succeeding, how does that happen? Because, you know, the culture is the same, the kids are pretty much the same, we're very diverse and we're scattered, and I have to think the teachers are the same. What's the difference that makes one school more successful than another?
I think one of the things that we would say is implementation of the plan. And so, implementation of the plan. So ensuring that we have consistency across schools, while we may have all of the same supports, but maximizing use of all of those supports. And as we continue to engage in continuous improvement, we'll be taking a deep look at our schools that did not meet growth or who are newly identified as low performing, and unpacking the levels of support and what needs to take place in those buildings.
And one more follow-up question, Kim. When you said the ACT was 17
Yes, sir.
to 19, you said UNC, is that the UNC? All
Yes, the University of North Carolina admissions.
It's admissions.
Yes.
What about, how do we do on the SAT?
So the SAT is not one of our state measures. So it's unlike the ACT where every child should take that as a junior, is required to take that. We don't have that SAT measure within our district.
I know there was some criticism at some point years ago when they were saying, you know, take the ACT, don't take the SAT. And there was some, you know, people making an issue out of it, but you answered that.
Right. The ACT is part of our accountability measures.
Okay.
But back to the question, what do you see yourself having to do for these other schools to get them to grow like this principal here did? You basically put on a team effort to say, hey, this is what it took for us to do it. You guys can follow the same footsteps. Dr. Conley, it can't be always on Dr. Conley to be the one to be the ask him, hey, we need to get this done. So as supporters of him and people that work with him, what have you guys seen that needs to be done?
I think we've already started to act on it. When we think about the schools that were low performing, we assigned a specific area superintendent who worked specifically with those schools and specific district staff. We've now expanded that model to every school in the district will have a dedicated area superintendent and a dedicated C&I team to ensure that we are able to expand the work that we've done, not just in our lowest performing schools, but across our district, so that we can continue on the path that we're on during recovery.
And so we call that differentiated support. Our county does an excellent job with meeting the needs. Just like for students, we have different students, and they all learn different, and they have different needs. It's the same with school support. And so as Dr. Wilson Norman stated, the county is very strategic about ensuring that each school gets what they need so that their students can be successful.
Okay, so the other question I have is back to the principal. You made a progress of 8, almost 9, with what you've done so far. What do you see it's going to take to do a jump of 20?
We're going to continue to do the practices that we're doing. We have set up a lot of frameworks, good structures, procedures, best practices. And so we're going to continue not to do anything new, but to continue to ensure and implement the things that we're already doing, and just seeing how we can take that to the next level. As you all know, there's many challenges with, again, recruiting teachers. I think keeping the morale at the forefront, understanding that our teachers are human, they're doing everything that they can across the district to improve student achievement, and just making sure our teachers, I would say, are supported. The county does an excellent job with that, and so we're just going to keep that at the forefront and just keep pushing hard.
So to anybody this question, getting parents involved, when I had my child was going through Cumberland County Schools, I was very involved. I was that parent that you hated to have, but you loved to have me, because I was going to hold you accountable weekly of what my son was doing, not waiting till progress report. How do you get the parents to get that involved?
I would say in our strategic plan 2024, we talk about committed community. That includes the parents. Our district is committed to increase parent engagement. We have expanded the efforts of our communications department. In that department, we have a particular team that focuses on parent engagement and improving that in the schools.
I have another question. So you have the high numbers, you have the low numbers. What's the one number that you feel that you need to really work on, starting immediately the second as you're going forward, to get that number up across the board?
I don't know if we can reduce it to one number, but I would say that the opportunities we have to focus on the ACT, graduation rate, Math 1, Math 3, deepening our literacy work and the proficiency of all subgroups, and improving instruction and support in our Tier 1 schools will continue to be our focus. Here in Cumberland, even in the midst of the pandemic, we did not lose sight of our strategic plan. It has continued to be our azimuth to keep us focused on student learning.
Anybody else get an answer? Someone that hasn't spoken?
I would agree that there's not one number. We continue to focus on growth and the growth of all children, and using the data, as Mr. McMillan so eloquently stated, having a laser-like focus on the data and supporting teachers as well as administrative leadership teams with research-based strategies that are going to help promote the growth of all children.
One more question. I'm a little older, so I'm trying to figure out what the new rules are. Are parents still held accountable? The reason I ask is I've heard several teachers say that when they were doing the online things, necessarily someone wasn't at the other end. At some point, who bears a responsibility to make sure a student is where he or she needs to be? And
But I
or
think
even now that you've got a normal or traditional school, make sure they do homework or to do anything that's required.
Well, I think the old African proverb remains true. It takes a village to raise a child. And so some students may not have the necessary support at home, and some might. But that's why the entire village the school, the parents, the staff, the faith-based community, everyone has to work together to help our children be successful. It takes a village, but together we are rising.
And if I may add, although we would like ideally for all parents to be involved, that may not necessarily be the case. But as I tell my teachers, we try to just focus on those things that we have control over. Because a lot of times if you look at what you don't have control over, you can lose sight and focus of what's important that's in your control. So we really try to focus, and I'm sure other principals do as well, on those things that we can control.
Any more questions?
No.
Going once,
Sorry,
twice?
I don't know.
We appreciate you. There's an email address. If you think of anything else, we can get over to these folks later and get you answers. I'm sure they can hang around for a few more minutes if you need a one-on-one with